Have you ever wondered why your prayers sometimes feel like they're bouncing off the ceiling, never quite reaching their destination? Why, despite your sincere devotion and countless hours spent seeking divine guidance, God's voice remains mysteriously silent, or worse, drowned out by the relentless noise of daily life? What if I told you that the problem isn't with God's willingness to speak, but with where you've been taught to listen? For generations, we've been conditioned to believe that spiritual hearing requires us to reach upward, outward, beyond ourselves, as if the divine exists somewhere in a distant cosmic realm, far removed from our everyday reality. We close our eyes, fold our hands, and send our prayers into what feels like an endless void, hoping they'll somehow traverse the vast distance between earth and heaven. We strain, we plead, we beg for a sign, for clarity, for just one unmistakable word from above. Has this ever happened to you? That frustrating cycle of seeking, waiting, and wondering if anyone is actually listening on the other end. The truth is, this approach to spiritual hearing has left countless sincere seekers trapped in a perpetual state of spiritual frustration. Not because they lack faith or devotion, but because they've been looking in entirely the wrong direction. What if the veil between you and divine communication isn't nearly as thick as you've been led to believe? What if the distance you've been trying to bridge doesn't actually exist at all? But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. The revolutionary shift I'm about to share with you transforms everything you've understood about prayer, spiritual guidance, and divine communication. It's not about learning new techniques or mastering complex meditation practices. It's about awakening to something that has been present all along, hidden in plain sight within your very consciousness. Scripture itself reveals something profound that many of us have overlooked. The kingdom of heaven is not a distant destination you reach after death, nor is it reserved exclusively for spiritual masters or religious elites. It exists as a state of consciousness, a living reality, right here, right now, within you. This isn't mystical theory or wishful thinking. This is the practical foundation for genuine spiritual hearing, the kind that transforms not just your prayer life, but every decision, every relationship, every challenge you face. Stay with me until the end of this video, because what you're about to discover might fundamentally shift your entire understanding of how divine communication actually works. When you grasp that God's voice isn't something you need to search for in the heavens, but something already speaking in the stillness of your own being, everything changes. The desperate straining gives way to peaceful recognition. The anxious pleading transforms into joyful communion. The frustrating silence reveals itself as a voice that has been speaking all along. You simply needed to know where to listen. Think about the last time you were searching frantically for your phone, only to realize it was in your hand the entire time. That moment of recognition, when you stop searching and simply see what's already there, captures the essence of this transformation perfectly. Spiritual hearing works exactly the same way. The shift isn't about acquiring something new or developing a supernatural ability you don't possess. It's about recognizing what has always been present, what has been speaking to you from within since the very beginning. This recognition represents a complete reversal of everything most of us have been taught about divine communication. Instead of treating God's voice as something elusive that requires extraordinary effort to access, you begin to understand it as the natural frequency of your deepest consciousness. Always broadcasting, always available, simply waiting for you to tune in. The journey from straining to recognizing changes your entire spiritual experience. Where there was anxiety about whether you're hearing correctly, there emerges a quiet confidence. Where there was frustration about unanswered prayers, there develops an awareness of constant dialogue happening beneath the surface of your thoughts. The hidden truth behind this shift is surprisingly simple, yet its impact radiates into every corner of your life. Your decisions begin flowing from a different source. Instead of wrestling with choices through endless mental deliberation, you discover guidance arising naturally from stillness. Challenges that once triggered panic now become invitations to return to this inner awareness. Relationships transform as you perceive the same divine presence in others that you've recognized within yourself. Now, I want to go even deeper into how this actually works in your everyday experience, because understanding the concept intellectually is one thing. Living it practically is where the real transformation happens. The first step involves something so beautifully uncomplicated that many people initially dismiss it as too simple to be effective. It's the practice of presence, not as some elaborate spiritual discipline requiring hours of meditation, but as brief moments of recognition woven throughout your ordinary day. Subscribe to continue this journey with me. Each video explores practical ways to deepen your spiritual hearing and recognize divine guidance in everyday life. Imagine waking tomorrow morning, and before your feet even touch the floor, before you check your phone or mentally rehearse your to-do list, you pause for just a breath and acknowledge a simple truth. The kingdom of heaven is within me right now, not as a religious platitude you've memorized, but as a living reality you're choosing to recognize. This single moment creates a foundation for everything that follows. It's like tuning an instrument before playing. It sets the frequency for your entire day. The beauty of this practice is how it integrates seamlessly into your existing routine. You're driving to work, sitting in traffic that would normally trigger frustration, and you take 3 seconds to return to this. Awareness. You're in a tense meeting, feeling pressure mounting, and you pause internally to recognize the divine presence that exists beyond the material circumstances. You're preparing dinner, hands busy with mundane tasks, and you notice the sacred opportunity hidden within this ordinary moment. These aren't interruptions to your day. They're revelations of what your day has always been beneath the surface of appearances. Behind the scenes of this simple practice, something profound is taking place. Each recognition, no matter how brief, is adjusting your spiritual receptors, fine-tuning your ability to perceive guidance that's already flowing. You're not creating communication with the divine, you're removing the static that prevented you from hearing what was always there. If you've ever experienced even a fleeting moment where this kind of inner recognition brought unexpected clarity or peace, write in the comments, "I've felt this stillness." What most people miss entirely is that spiritual transformation doesn't follow the same rules as our achievement-oriented culture. We've been trained to believe that bigger efforts produce bigger results, that intensity equals effectiveness, that dramatic spiritual experiences are what create lasting change. But the hidden truth works in exactly the opposite way. The person who spends 5 minutes each morning recognizing divine presence within will experience far deeper transformation than someone who occasionally dedicates entire weekends to intensive spiritual retreats, only to return to complete unconsciousness the rest of the month. This revelation contradicts almost everything our culture teaches us about success and progress. We want the quick fix, the breakthrough moment, the sudden enlightenment that changes everything overnight. But spiritual hearing develops more like learning a language or building physical strength through consistent, gentle repetition that gradually rewires your consciousness at the deepest levels. Think of it as the difference between watering a plant with a small cup every day versus flooding it with a fire hose once a month. The daily attention creates sustainable growth, while the occasional deluge either overwhelms or gets absorbed without lasting impact. The beauty of this approach is how it removes the pressure to have profound spiritual experiences every time you turn inward. Some moments of recognition will feel deeply meaningful, filled with clarity and peace. Others will feel mechanical, routine, almost empty. Both are equally valuable because both are creating the neural pathways, the spiritual muscle memory that allows divine guidance to flow more naturally through your awareness. Your consistency is doing the work even when you don't feel immediate results. Now, I want to show you how this practice of stillness becomes especially powerful in one of life's most challenging arenas, your physical health. When symptoms appear in your body, whether it's a persistent headache, chronic pain, or something more serious, notice what happens in your consciousness. The immediate reaction for most of us involves fear that quickly spirals into panic. We become completely identified with the physical condition, consumed by worst-case scenarios, desperately seeking solutions while our minds race with anxiety about outcomes. This fear-based reaction creates so much noise in your consciousness that hearing any divine guidance becomes virtually impossible. It's like trying to have a quiet conversation in the middle of a thunderstorm. The second shift in awakening spiritual hearing involves transforming your relationship with health challenges entirely. Before you react, before you allow fear to dominate your awareness, you turn within to recognize a deeper truth. In the kingdom of heaven that exists within your consciousness right now, there is only wholeness, only divine perfection. This doesn't mean denying physical symptoms or refusing medical care. It means creating space where God's voice can actually be heard clearly about your well-being. When you approach health from this transformed awareness, something remarkable happens. The panic subsides enough that you can receive genuine guidance about what steps to take. You make decisions from clarity rather than fear. You seek appropriate medical wisdom when needed, but you're not consumed by anxiety about diagnoses or prognoses. Behind the scenes, this inner stillness is creating the optimal conditions for your body's natural healing intelligence to function, while simultaneously opening channels of divine communication that were previously blocked by stress and worry. If this approach to health challenges resonates with something you've experienced or needed to hear, write in the comments, stillness before reaction. There's a critical distinction here that changes everything about how you navigate health challenges, or any challenge for that matter. Turning inward to recognize divine wholeness doesn't mean abandoning common sense or rejecting the practical wisdom that medical science offers. It's not an either-or decision between spiritual awareness and appropriate action. The transformation happens when you integrate both, allowing them to work together rather than treating them as opposing forces. The pivotal decision point you face in any health situation isn't whether to seek medical care or rely solely on spiritual practice. It's much simpler and more profound than that. Will you react from fear or respond from spiritual awareness? When you react from fear, your decisions become frantic, scattered, desperate. You might seek multiple opinions without ever finding peace, or you might freeze entirely, paralyzed by anxiety about what to do next. But when you respond from spiritual awareness, when you first turn inward to recognize the kingdom of heaven within you, you create the mental and emotional space where divine guidance can actually flow. And to that space, you hear clearly whether to seek medical attention, what questions to ask, which practitioner to consult, what treatment aligns with your body's needs. This integration of spiritual clarity and practical wisdom produces decisions that feel right at the deepest level, not because you're following a formula, but because you're accessing intelligence that transcends both purely material thinking and disconnected spiritual idealism. The impact of this approach extends far beyond health, into every dimension of your life, where fear typically drowns out divine communication. Now, I want to explore perhaps the most emotionally charged arena where this same principle creates dramatic transformation: your relationship with money. Financial concerns have an almost unparalleled ability to trigger our deepest survival fears. When unexpected bills arrive, when income drops, when the economy becomes uncertain, notice what happens in your consciousness. The anxiety can be overwhelming, creating such intense static that hearing any divine guidance about provision becomes nearly impossible. Here's the hidden truth that most teachings about prosperity completely miss. Financial freedom has very little to do with the actual numbers in your bank account and everything to do with the awareness operating in your consciousness. From the kingdom perspective, from the recognition that divine substance is infinite and omnipresent, you begin to understand that your experience of supply is primarily a reflection of your consciousness, not a result of external economic conditions. This revelation doesn't mean ignoring practical financial planning or pretending bills don't exist. It means approaching your finances from an entirely different foundation. When you operate from scarcity consciousness, every financial decision becomes a battlefield of fear. You grip tightly to what you have, suspicious of loss, anxious about the future, making choices from desperation rather than wisdom. But when you recognize the kingdom within, when you turn inward to access the awareness that divine provision is already present in your consciousness, the journey toward financial decisions transforms completely. Behind the scenes, this shift in awareness opens channels for guidance, opportunities, and solutions that were literally invisible to scarcity-based thinking. If you've noticed how your mindset about money affects what actually shows up in your experience, write in the comments. Consciousness creates supply. The practical application of this transformed consciousness shows up most clearly in how you respond when financial pressure hits. That unexpected car repair bill arrives, or a client cancels a contract, or you receive news that your hours are being reduced. In those moments, you have a choice point that determines everything that follows. The old pattern would be immediate panic, mental catastrophizing about worst-case scenarios, frantic searching for solutions, while your mind spins in anxiety. But from this new awareness, your first response becomes something entirely different. You turn inward to recognize that God's voice speaks guidance even in this exact circumstance. This shift doesn't mean sitting passively and waiting for money to magically appear. It means approaching every financial decision as an opportunity to hear divine wisdom rather than treating it as a crisis that needs immediate reactive solutions. You still create budgets, you still plan responsibly, you still take practical action. The transformation is in the quality of presence you bring to these activities. Where there was emotional reactivity that clouded your judgment, there emerges clarity. Where there was grasping and desperate energy that actually repelled opportunities, there develops a quiet confidence that attracts unexpected solutions. Behind the scenes of this inner work, you'll notice doors opening that weren't visible before, conversations leading to possibilities you hadn't considered, timing that seems almost miraculous but is actually the natural result of consciousness aligned with divine guidance. If this resonated with you, tap that like button, not for algorithms, but as a quiet acknowledgement that this conversation mattered and spiritual truth still transforms lives. Now, I want to reveal how this same principle of inner stillness creates perhaps its most powerful impact in the area of life that causes more confusion and pain than almost any other: your relationships with people. Think about your closest connections for a moment. How often do interactions with family, romantic partners, friends, or colleagues become the exact places where hearing divine guidance feels most impossible? There's a hidden dynamic at work here that most people never recognize. We approach relationships with unconscious agendas, seeking validation to prove our worth, security to ease our fears, fulfillment to fill our inner emptiness. These emotional needs and expectations create such thick clouds around our spiritual receptors that perceiving any divine guidance through the relationship becomes nearly impossible. You're so focused on what you need from the other person, so reactive to whether they're meeting those needs or disappointing you, that the still, small voice within gets completely drowned out by emotional noise. The fourth shift in awakening spiritual hearing transforms this entire relational landscape. When you recognize divine presence within yourself first, when you turn inward to acknowledge the kingdom of heaven in your own consciousness, something remarkable happens. You naturally begin perceiving that same divine presence in others as well. This recognition doesn't make relationship challenges disappear or turn difficult people into easy ones. What it does is provide an entirely different foundation for navigating every interaction. Instead of approaching conversations as battles to win or performances to execute perfectly, you encounter them as opportunities to witness divine truth expressing itself through human experience. If you've discovered that your relationships transform when you first find stillness within yourself, write in the comments, "Inner peace changes everything." The practical power of this awareness reveals itself in those precise moments when relationships become most challenging. Your spouse makes a cutting remark that hits a vulnerable spot, or a friend cancels plans for the third time, leaving you feeling unimportant. In those instances, your habitual response is immediate: defensiveness, hurt, withdrawal, retaliation. But when you've been practicing the recognition of divine presence within yourself, something different becomes possible. You pause, even for just a breath, and turn inward to acknowledge the kingdom of heaven in your own consciousness. This creates a sacred moment between trigger and response, where you can actually hear guidance that transcends the emotional reaction. In that space of stillness, revelations emerge that were completely invisible to your reactive mind. You might see the pain behind your spouse's words, rather than just the attack. You might recognize your friend's cancellation as reflecting their own struggle, rather than a statement about your worth. You might hear divine wisdom about setting boundaries or speaking truth with compassion. The catalyst for relationship transformation isn't finding perfect people who never hurt or disappoint you. It's developing this capacity for perfect listening, where you begin hearing God's voice speaking through even the most difficult interactions. Behind the scenes of every healthy relationship is this ability to pause, return to inner awareness, and respond from spiritual clarity rather than emotional reactivity. Now, I want to show you how this same practice of stillness creates transformation in what might be the most spiritually neglected arena of daily life, your work. For so many people, professional environments feel like spiritual dead zones where divine guidance seems not just difficult, but impossible to access. The pressure of deadlines turns every project into a survival test. Office politics create constant anxiety about perception and positioning. Performance expectations generate a frequency of stress that completely drowns out the still small voice within. You might have a rich spiritual life at home, but the moment you step into your workplace, it's as if you enter a different dimension where all that awareness evaporates. The fifth shift in awakening spiritual hearing revolutionizes this entire experience by transforming work from mere employment, something you endure to pay bills, into spiritual expression. This doesn't mean quitting your job to become a minister or only working in explicitly spiritual fields. It means recognizing divine reality beyond material appearances, even in the most mundane or challenging workplace situations. When a project deadline triggers your usual anxiety, you pause to acknowledge the kingdom within, creating space where divine ideas can actually flow. When a difficult colleague interaction arises, you recognize the opportunity to witness spiritual truth operating through human dynamics. The journey of your workday becomes something entirely different when approached from this consciousness. Not easier necessarily, but infused with meaning and guidance that was always present, but previously unrecognized. If you've experienced moments where bringing inner stillness to work situations created unexpected breakthroughs, write in the comments, "Presence transforms work." The hidden truth about creativity and problem solving that most productivity experts completely miss is this: the most groundbreaking solutions, the most innovative ideas, the breakthroughs that seem to come out of nowhere, they rarely emerge from stressed, constricted consciousness. You can't force creative intelligence through sheer mental effort or willpower, but when you access the unlimited intelligence that speaks within kingdom awareness, ideas flow with a naturalness that feels almost effortless. That impossible project deadline that once triggered days of anxiety becomes something entirely different when approached from stillness. You turn inward, recognize divine presence, and suddenly solutions appear that your stressed mind could never have generated. Insights arrive with perfect timing. Resources materialize unexpectedly. Collaborations form organically. The same transformation happens with difficult colleague interactions. Instead of perceiving them as obstacles to endure or battles to win, you begin seeing them as opportunities to witness the kingdom expressing itself through human dynamics. When you recognize divine presence within yourself before the meeting, you naturally perceive it operating in the other person as well, even when they're being challenging. This doesn't make you passive or ineffective. It makes you extraordinarily perceptive, able to hear guidance about how to communicate, when to speak, when to listen, what the real issue is beneath the surface conflict. Behind the scenes of every truly successful professional journey is this capacity to access intelligence beyond the limitations of anxious, reactive thinking. Now, I want to reveal what might be the most precious discovery on this entire journey of awakening spiritual hearing. As kingdom consciousness matures through your consistent practice, through those daily moments of recognition, through turning inward before reacting, through acknowledging divine presence in ordinary situations, you begin to experience something that changes everything about how you move through life. It's an unshakable peace that doesn't depend on circumstances being perfect or problems being solved. This isn't the superficial positivity that pretends everything is fine when it clearly isn't. It's not emotional bypassing that refuses to acknowledge real challenges or genuine pain. It's authentic spiritual awareness that remains steady through life's inevitable fluctuations. The revelation here goes deeper than most people realize. When you position yourself to hear God's voice clearly through these practices of stillness and recognition, what you discover isn't just guidance about specific decisions, though that certainly comes. What emerges is a foundational frequency of tranquility that transcends any particular situation. Financial setbacks still require practical response, but they don't trigger the same panic. Relationship difficulties still need to be addressed, but they don't consume you with emotional drama. Health concerns still warrant appropriate care, but they don't dominate your consciousness with fear. The impact of this inner peace radiates into every decision, every interaction, every challenge you face. If you've glimpsed this quality of peace that exists beyond circumstances, write in the comments, "I've touched this stillness." Now I want to be completely honest with you about what this journey actually requires, because the hidden truth here might be challenging to hear in our culture of instant gratification and quick fixes. The pathway to this transformation demands something that most spiritual seekers are unwilling to give: consistent commitment regardless of immediate results. This isn't a weekend workshop that produces instant enlightenment. It's not a 21-day challenge that guarantees dramatic breakthroughs. The real transformation unfolds through daily practice, even when you feel absolutely no immediate effects. Through faith in spiritual truth, when material appearances seem to contradict it completely. Through patience during what can be a painfully gradual development process. Some people begin this practice and experience noticeable shifts within weeks. Others work diligently for months or even years before significant changes become visible in their external circumstances. The decisive factor isn't spiritual talent or divine favoritism. It's simple persistence, the willingness to continue recognizing truth regardless of apparent results. Think about any meaningful transformation you've experienced in your life. Did it happen overnight? Real change, the kind that reshapes your entire experience, almost always unfolds through consistent small adjustments rather than singular dramatic events. Spiritual hearing follows this same developmental pattern, gradually tuning your consciousness to divine frequency with increasing precision through repetition and dedication. The mindset shift that makes this sustainable involves embracing what modern culture rejects entirely, the wisdom of patient unfolding. We've been conditioned to expect immediate downloads, same-day delivery, instant results in virtually every domain. When we bring these same expectations to spiritual practice, wanting instant clarity or immediate healing, we set ourselves up for disappointment and abandonment of the very practices that would produce lasting transformation if given time to work. Now, I want to offer you perhaps the most liberating revelation of this entire journey. You can begin right now, exactly where you are, with whatever understanding you currently possess. The path to hearing God's voice more clearly doesn't require prerequisites or spiritual credentials. You don't need to master complex theology first. You don't need years of meditation experience or advanced spiritual status. You don't need to fix yourself or become someone different. The kingdom of heaven is within you at this very moment. It has always been there, and it will always be there. This truth contradicts so much of our conventional spiritual programming that tells us we need elaborate preparation or special training before we're worthy of divine communication. The blueprint for transformation isn't about adding something new to your life through tremendous effort. It's about removing the barriers to what already exists eternally within your consciousness. You can start today, right now, with your very next breath, by recognizing as often as you remember throughout your day, the kingdom of heaven is within me now. Divine presence is my true nature. Spiritual guidance is speaking within my consciousness, regardless of external appearances. If you're ready to begin this practice today, exactly as you are, write in the comments, "I'm starting now." If you've stayed with me through this entire journey, it tells me something important about you. You're genuinely seeking a deeper connection with divine guidance, not just collecting spiritual information. That distinction matters. The practices we've explored today aren't theoretical concepts to admire from a distance. They're living invitations to transform how you experience every moment of your life. If this message resonated with something true in your heart, if you felt that quiet recognition of, yes, this is what I've been searching for, I'd love to continue exploring these pathways with you. Subscribe to join this community of seekers who are discovering that spiritual hearing isn't reserved for mystics or saints. It's your natural birthright, waiting to be recognized. Each video I create is designed to translate profound spiritual truth into practical steps you can implement immediately, right where you are. And if you made it all the way to this moment with me, write in the comments, "This message found me." Your words might be exactly what another person needs to see to begin their own practice of stillness and recognition. Consider tapping that like button as well. Not for algorithms or metrics, but as a quiet acknowledgement between us that this conversation mattered, that spiritual truth still has the power to transform lives in our distracted, noise-filled world. There's a video right here that explores how to maintain this awareness of divine presence, even when life becomes chaotic and circumstances seem overwhelming. It's a perfect continuation of what we've discovered today. Click and continue with me over there, and let's go deeper together into the practice of hearing God speak through stillness. Until we meet again, remember, the kingdom of heaven is within you right now, and divine guidance is already speaking. You simply need to recognize what has always been there.
My friends, we gathered today not to learn something new, but to remember what has always been true. For centuries, mankind has lived under a gentle but persistent illusion, an illusion that has shaped our prayers, our fears, and our deepest desires. We have believed that God is with us. We have believed that somewhere, somehow, just beyond the reach of our fingertips, there is a presence moving toward us, guiding us, helping us. If only we can attract it, if only we can please it, if only we can call it into our circumstances. But let us pause and look within for a moment. When you say, God is with me, who is the me that God must come to? Who is this separate being standing outside the divine embrace? The moment you say, God is with me, you have already accepted a duality that does not exist in spiritual reality. You have placed God on one side and yourself on the other, and you have begun the long, weary journey of trying to unite what was never separate. This, my friends, has been the central misunderstanding of the spiritual life. We have imagined a God who travels, a presence that comes and goes, a love that responds to our cries only when we have prayed hard enough or lived well enough. And because we believe this, we live in fear. We live in self-doubt. We live in a constant state of trying to get what is already ours. Let us begin right here at the opening of this work, together with a truth that can dissolve a lifetime of seeking. God is not merely with you. God is being you. The very life that beats your heart, the intelligence that animates your mind, the love that longs to express through you, that is the presence you have been calling God. It has never been outside you. It has never been distant. It has never been separate. You see, the spiritual journey is not the attempt to bring God closer. It is the quiet recognition that God could never be absent. The kingdom you have searched for in the heavens, in the scriptures, in the rituals of religion, is the kingdom that Jesus said is within you. Not as a poetic idea, not as a hopeful metaphor, but as the literal truth of your being. And so, as we begin today, let us set aside the old belief that God must come to us or that we must reach out to God. Let us rest in a deeper reality. The presence you seek is the very consciousness by which you are aware in this moment. It does not move toward you. It expresses as you. We are not here to invite God into our lives. We are here to awaken to the life that has never been anything but God. Let us go deeper now. If we are to understand the nature of this presence that lives us, we must return to the simplest of all spiritual statements, a teaching so clear that only the human mind could have complicated it. When Jesus said, "The kingdom of God is within you," he was not offering poetry. He was not speaking symbolically. He was revealing the central fact of spiritual life, that the fullness of God, the wholeness of God, the infinitude of God, is not a distant realm to be reached after death or earned through righteousness. It is the very essence of your being in this moment. The kingdom is not something you travel toward. It is not something you acquire. It is not something that descends upon you when your prayers are perfect enough. The kingdom is the divine consciousness expressing as the life you call I. And because this kingdom is within you, every attempt to seek God outside yourself must fail. You cannot find what you already are. You cannot import the presence that is already shining at the core of your being. This is why so many seekers wander endlessly. They read more books, attend more meetings, recite more prayers, all in the hope that God will draw near. Yet Jesus says, look within. Look where you have never thought to look. Look beneath the thoughts, beneath the emotions, beneath the sense of a personal, separate self, and there you will find the kingdom that has never left you. You see, the world has reversed the teaching of the Master. We have made the kingdom a future reward, a distant heaven, a spiritual landscape somewhere beyond the clouds. But the Master placed it exactly where it had always been within you. And when he said, the Father and I are one, he was not describing a relationship unique to himself. He was revealing the universal truth of being the divine nature is the root of every life. This kingdom is not something you enter. It is something you awaken to. It is not something God establishes later. It is what God has established now. Your task is not to climb toward it. Your task is to remove the veil of separation in your own consciousness. And what is that veil? It is the belief that you are a human being trying to reach a divine presence. It is the belief that God is somewhere else. The moment this belief is released, even for a single breath, you begin to sense the stillness, the peace, the completeness of a presence that has never been absent. The kingdom within does not shout. It does not force itself into your awareness. It is a gentle unfolding, a quiet recognition that the life you have called me is, in truth, the life of God expressing in individual form. When you truly understand this, you will stop searching outside. You will stop begging for what is already within, and you will begin to live from the consciousness that Jesus intended not as a seeker of God, but as an expression of God. As we move forward, let us look more deeply at this great transition. Every sincere seeker must eventually make the shift from duality to oneness. It is not an intellectual shift. It is not the acceptance of a doctrine. It is a profound change in consciousness, a spiritual awakening in which you see clearly that there is not God and you. There is only God appearing as you. Duality is the oldest illusion known to mankind. It is the belief that there are two powers, two beings, two existences, one divine, one human, one perfect, one flawed, one infinite, one limited. And all suffering, every conflict, every fear in your life arises from this belief in two-ness. The moment you think you stand apart from the presence, you begin to doubt, to struggle, to defend, to seek. You begin to live as a creature separate from its source. But this separation exists nowhere except in human belief. It has no spiritual reality. It has no divine sanction. It is no more real than a shadow mistaken for substance. And the instant this veil begins to lift, the instant you recognize that the life you are living is not a personal life but a divine expression, the entire structure of fear collapses. Let me say this plainly so that you do not miss it. God is not accompanying your life. God is the life you are living. You are not a mortal being borrowing breath from infinity. You are not a fragile personality hoping for divine support. The very breath you breathe is the movement of God. The very intelligence that thinks is an activity of the divine mind. The love you feel, the intuition that guides you, the compassion that arises in you, these are not human virtues. They are the nature of God expressing as individual consciousness. Duality is the oldest illusion known to mankind. It is the belief that there are two powers, two beings, Two existences, one divine, one human, one perfect, one flawed, one infinite, one limited. And all suffering, every conflict, every fear in your life arises from this belief in two-ness. The moment you think you stand apart from the presence, you begin to doubt, to struggle, to defend, to seek. You begin to live as a creature separate from its source. But this separation exists nowhere except in human belief. It has no spiritual reality. It has no divine sanction. It is no more real than a shadow mistaken for substance. And the instant this veil begins to lift, the instant you recognize that the life you are living is not a personal life but a divine expression, the entire structure of fear collapses. This shift from duality to oneness is not achieved through effort. You cannot force it. You cannot will it. You cannot study your way into it. It comes through recognition. It comes through the quiet inner knowing that what you have called I all your life is, in truth, God appearing as you. And when this recognition dawns even faintly, you will discover that fear has no foundation. You will discover that lack has no cause. You will discover that illness cannot touch the truth of your being. For all of these belong to the belief in separation, and once oneness is glimpsed, the power of separation begins to fade. My friends, this is the turning point of the spiritual path. Everything you have sought outside yourself begins to reveal itself within. Everything you feared begins to lose its voice. And everything you hoped God would do for you begins to unfold naturally as the activity of the divine presence that is your life. You do not become one with God. You awaken to the truth that you have never been anything else. Let us continue, and let us approach a point that may seem subtle, but upon which the entire spiritual life rests. For many sincere seekers, the phrase, God is with me, has been a source of comfort. It has carried them through hardship. It has soothed their anxieties and strengthened their hope. But I must tell you gently, yet truthfully, that this statement is still rooted in the very belief that keeps you from realizing the fullness of your spiritual identity. To say God is with me is to affirm a presence that moves in and out of your experience. It assumes a proximity that can grow stronger or weaker depending on your behavior. It suggests a God who responds to your prayers, who comes when you call, who arrives when you are worthy, and stays away when you are not. And though this idea may feel comforting to the human mind, it is also the source of fear, guilt, and insecurity. As long as you believe God must come to you, you will fear the moments when you cannot feel God. You will interpret every difficulty as distance from the divine. You will judge yourself by your emotions, your moods, your circumstances, believing that God is nearer when life is easy and farther when life is hard. And when prayer seems unanswered, you will assume failure not in the prayer, but in yourself. This is the tragedy of God is with me consciousness. It still assumes too. It still imagines a universe where God must travel, must approach, must respond. But God is not a visitor. God is not a presence that steps in and out of your life like a shifting shadow. God does not arrive. God does not depart. God does not draw near. God does not withdraw. These movements exist only in human belief, never in spiritual reality. The divine presence is not with you, it is you. It is the life you call I. It is the mind by which you think, the love by which you feel, the being by which you exist. And when you settle into this truth, even for a moment, fear begins to vanish. For how can you fear losing what you cannot be separate from? How can you worry about God's absence when God is the very essence of your being? How can you plead for help from a presence that is the inner light of your own consciousness? You see, the danger in the phrase, God is with me, is not that it is false, it is incomplete. It is the first step of awakening, but it cannot be your home. If you linger there, you will forever walk the path of the beggar, the seeker, the one who hopes God will hear, will come, will act. But the moment you awaken to oneness, you discover that God is not your helper, God is your identity. This does not make you God, for the ego cannot contain the infinite, but it reveals that the infinite is expressing itself as you, through you, in you, and as the very substance of your being. Once this dawns, the whole structure of petitionary prayer collapses. There is no longer a God to convince, no longer a presence to summon, no longer a blessing to chase. There is only recognition of what already is. To mature spiritually is to move from seeking God's nearness to realizing God's nature. It is to exchange the insecurity of duality for the peace of oneness, and this shift transforms everything because it removes the central illusion that has kept you living as a separate creature trying to reach the divine. My friends, if you hear nothing else today, hear this. You cannot lose God. You cannot lack God. You cannot be distant from God, because God is not something added to your life. God is the life itself. The day you stop asking for God's presence is the day you begin to experience it. Now we come to a central pillar of the spiritual life, one that must be understood if you are to live in freedom rather than fear. For centuries, prayer has been built upon the assumption of lack. God, please give me this. God, please heal me. God, please fix my circumstances. And the more intensely we desire, the more passionately we plead, the more exhausted we become, because all supplication begins with a silent confession. I do not have what I need. But the spiritual life, the life that Jesus revealed, the life that the mystics have lived, the life the infinite way invites you into, is not founded on lack. It is not founded on asking. It is founded on recognition. Recognition is the quiet realization that everything you have asked God to give you has already been given. Recognition is the understanding that you cannot seek the presence, because the presence is the very ground of your being. Recognition does not beg, it acknowledges. Recognition does not reach, it rests. Recognition does not attempt to change God, it allows God to reveal the truth already present. You see, all supplicating prayer assumes a God outside yourself who must be persuaded. But recognition knows that God is the very life you are living and that nothing needs to be added to that life. What is needed is not divine intervention, but spiritual awareness. This is why Jesus said, "Your Father knows what you need before you ask." How could this be true unless the divine presence already fills every space of your consciousness? And if that presence is already complete, already perfect, already fully expressing its wholeness, then what prayer could you possibly offer that would improve upon what God already is? And so the prayer of recognition is simple. It begins with stillness. It begins with a willingness to stop trying to achieve what is already true. It begins with a pause, a breath, a moment of surrender in which the mind ceases its frantic activity and yields to the deeper knowing within. Recognition is the quiet realization that everything you have asked God to give you has already been given. Recognition is the understanding that you cannot seek the presence, because the presence is the very ground of your being. Recognition does not beg, it acknowledges. Recognition does not reach, it rests. Recognition does not attempt to change God, it allows God to reveal the truth already present. In that moment, you do not say, "God, please be here." You rest in the awareness, God is the very presence of this moment. You do not say, "God, please heal me." You rest in the awareness, the life functioning in me is already whole. Recognition is not a technique, it is not a ritual, it is the natural state of consciousness once separation has dissolved. And every time you return to recognition, Even for a few seconds, you are stepping into the kingdom. You are dropping the illusion that you stand outside your own source. You do not say, God, please guide me. You rest in the awareness, divine intelligence is the mind by which I think. Let me offer a simple way to begin. Several times during the day, stop for just a few breaths and allow this inner truth to arise. The presence I seek is the presence I already am. Understand this. Supplication reinforces the belief in a limited, needy self. Recognition reveals the truth of the self that has never needed anything because it has never been separate from its own infinite supply. You need not say it loudly. You need not say it perfectly. You need not feel anything at all. Simply acknowledge, simply recognize, simply rest. My friends, you have spent many years asking. Now begin to discover the joy of recognizing. Let us now consider what happens practically, tangibly, unmistakably, when the consciousness of God shifts from being something outside you to the recognition of God as your very life. For this is not theory. This is not philosophy. This is not the memorizing of spiritual ideas. The moment you stop living as a separate creature and begin to rest in the truth of divine identity, everything in your life begins to take on a different tone, a different rhythm, a different quality of unfolding. The first transformation you will notice is this. Fear begins to dissolve. Fear can survive only where separation is believed. Fear requires a me who must face life alone, who must protect, defend, and control. But when you recognize that the life living you is the same infinite presence that has formed galaxies and guides the stars, fear loses its foundation. You discover that you are not navigating life by yourself. Life is guiding you from within. The second transformation is clarity. Where once decisions were made through analysis, through worry, through trying to calculate outcomes, now decisions arise from a calm inner knowing. You begin to live intuitively, not impulsively, but from the quiet assurance that the divine intelligence that formed your being continues to govern your experience. Ideas come when they are needed. Guidance appears without strain. You do not reach for answers, they reveal themselves. The third transformation is peace even when nothing has changed externally. The moment you recognize God as the life you are living, you cease trying to fix the world around you. You cease believing that your peace depends upon circumstances. You discover that peace is the nature of the divine presence itself, and that presence is the ground of your being. This inner stillness becomes your home, your refuge, your atmosphere, even when the world storms around you. The fourth transformation is found in relationships. When you no longer see yourself as a separate human personality, you stop demanding, expecting, or fearing the behavior of others. You realize that everyone around you is also the expression of God, though many do not yet know it, and this recognition softens your gaze. You begin to behold the divine behind the human mask. Conflict loses its bite. Judgment loses its power. Compassion rises naturally, not as an emotional effort, but as the very nature of the presence expressing itself as you. The fifth transformation is supply. When you no longer see yourself as a limited human being trying to acquire good, but as the expression of the infinite source itself, lack loses its meaning. You stop living from desperation and begin living from completeness. This does not mean money falls from the sky. It means that the consciousness of wholeness draws into your experience the forms that match it: opportunities, ideas, relationships, provision. The law of consciousness is simple. What you recognize within becomes the pattern of life without. Let me offer a gentle story, not as proof, but as illustration. A woman who spent years praying desperately for financial help finally encountered the teaching of inner recognition. Instead of begging God for supply, she began each day resting in the awareness, the source of all life flows as my life now. She did this without expectation, without trying to influence events. Weeks passed, the fear of lack began to quiet, her decisions became clearer. She stopped chasing solutions and began acting from peace. And gradually, almost without noticing when it happened, her outer circumstances shifted. A new opportunity came. A long-delayed project opened. What had seemed impossible became natural. Nothing magical occurred. Consciousness changed, and experience followed as it always must. The sixth transformation is healing. Where once the body was feared as fragile, vulnerable, and separate from spirit, you now see it as an instrument through which the divine presence expresses. This does not deny physical conditions. It simply refuses to build identity around them. You begin to understand that the body responds to consciousness, and as fear dissolves, as separation dissolves, as inner peace becomes natural, the body often reflects that harmony, sometimes quickly, sometimes gradually, but always in accordance with the changes taking place within. And finally, the deepest transformation is freedom. When you know that God is the life living you, the entire burden of existence lifts. You no longer wrestle with life. You no longer battle circumstances. You no longer attempt to force spiritual growth. You rest, you allow, you listen, and you discover that the same presence that animates your life is unfolding your path with a wisdom far greater than human effort could achieve. My friends, life does not transform because God intervenes. Life transforms because your consciousness awakens. Now, let us turn to the heart of spiritual practice, not the outer rituals, not the spoken prayers, not the mental affirmations, but the interior stillness where the presence reveals itself. For if the kingdom of God is within you, then you must learn how to enter that inner sanctuary, not through effort, not through imagination, but through the simple grace of becoming still. The great mistake of spiritual practice is the belief that it must be active. You have been taught to speak to God, to call upon God, to plead with God, to chant, to visualize, to fill the mind with holy thoughts. But the mind that tries to reach God is the very thing that obscures God, and the noise of human thinking is the veil that hides the silence in which the divine presence is known. Therefore, the highest spiritual practice is not doing, it is undoing. It is the quiet release of mental effort. It is the cessation of trying. It is the surrender of the belief that you must achieve something, feel something, or create spiritual experience. True meditation is not an act of reaching for God. It is the stillness in which you discover that God has already been here all along. Let me say this plainly. The presence is not found through words. The presence is not found through thought. The presence is found in the absence of both. When you sit quietly, not to get something, not to change something, not to force a feeling, but simply to be, you begin to feel a subtle shift. The mind softens, the body relaxes, the breath finds its natural rhythm, and in that stillness, you become aware of a quiet, living presence at the core of your being. It is not felt through sensation. It is not heard through sound. It is known through a deep, wordless awareness. This is the secret of meditation, as taught to those who truly sought illumination. Be still and let God reveal God. And you do not need an hour. You do not need a sacred space. You do not need a perfect mind. You need only the willingness to stop just for a moment and to rest in the truth that the life within you is divine. Let me guide you into a simple practice, not as a technique, but as a doorway. Wherever you are, perhaps as you listen now, allow yourself to pause. No effort, no striving, no attempt to reach out. Simply let the next breath be natural. And now, in this quietness, recognize not with the mind, not with words, but with inner awareness, God is the very presence of this moment. Do not try to feel God. Do not try to experience something mystical. Simply recognize and rest. This is the beginning of silent union. This is the entrance into the kingdom. And when practiced consistently, 3 seconds here, 5 seconds there, a minute during moments of stillness, this inner silence begins to weave itself into your entire day. It becomes your atmosphere. It becomes the ground upon which your thoughts and actions unfold. You will discover that the less you try, the more you become aware of the divine presence. The quieter you become, the more guidance arises. The more deeply you rest, the more easily life flows. For silence is not empty. Silence is filled with the divine activity that human effort cannot produce. Let me share something essential. You do not meditate to bring God into your life. You meditate to become aware of the God who has never left. This practice of silent union is not escape from the world. It is entry into reality. It does not remove you from your responsibilities. It empowers you to meet them with clarity and peace. It is not something you do in addition to life. It becomes the very foundation of life. And as you return to this silence throughout your day between tasks, in moments of uncertainty, before speaking, before acting, you will find that solutions arise without effort, opportunities appear without strain, and peace remains even amid challenges. Why? Because you are no longer living from a human sense of self. You are living from the presence within. This is the true meditation. This is the doorway to the kingdom. This is the practice that dissolves the illusion of separation and reveals the oneness that has always been the truth of your being. Now that we have entered the silence together, let us speak of what comes next, not merely the recognition of God within, but the living of that truth in daily experience. For spiritual awareness is not confined to the quiet moments. It is meant to be carried into every action, every conversation, every circumstance of life. The purpose of realization is not to retreat from the world, but to illuminate it from within. The question is not, how do I act more spiritual? The question is, how do I allow the divine presence to express itself as my life? This is the essence of oneness, not that you adorn yourself with spiritual words or practices, but that you stop living as a separate self and begin to yield to the deeper life that seeks to express through you. You do not become divine. You permit the divine nature, already within, to shine unobstructed. When you live as the expression of God, something beautiful happens. Your actions lose their strain. Your efforts lose their desperation. Your decisions lose their confusion. For you are no longer acting from personal will. You are flowing from the inner presence. Consider this. The branch does not struggle to bear fruit. It does not demand strength, nor plead for nourishment, nor worry about the seasons. It simply abides in the vine, and the life of the vine expresses as the fruit. So too, when you abide in the inner presence, when you recognize yourself as the expression of the divine, your life begins to bear its natural fruit without effort. Let us explore how this unfolds in daily living. In your work, you stop asking, "What should I do?" and begin listening inwardly. What would love express here? What would intelligence reveal here? What is the next effortless step? Actions arise without anxiety because they do not come from the limited human mind. In your relationships, you cease projecting your fears, expectations, and insecurities onto others. Instead, you behold the truth that each person before you is also a vessel of the same divine presence. Even when their behavior seems unkind or confused, you recognize that the Christ within them remains untouched. This recognition shifts interactions in ways that force can never achieve. In moments of challenge, you stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and begin resting in the truth. This circumstance cannot alter my spiritual identity. God is the life I am. Nothing can oppose the nature of God expressing itself. And from this awareness, wisdom unfolds. Solutions appear. Strength arises. In moments of success, you no longer cling to achievements as personal accomplishments, nor fear their loss. You understand that success is simply one form through which the divine presence has chosen to express temporarily. You do not grasp it. You do not exalt in it. You receive it with gratitude and release it with grace. In moments of failure, you do not collapse into guilt or self-condemnation. You recognize that failure belongs only to the human sense of self, not to the divine identity. And so, failure does not define you. It becomes a passing appearance that cannot touch the truth of your being. Living as the expression of God is not a lofty ideal. It is the simplest way of life. It means you cease trying to be something holy, wise, good, successful, and instead recognize that everything God is already seeks expression through you. You do not have to force compassion. Compassion flows naturally when you stop defending yourself. You do not have to force patience. Patience appears when you rest in inner peace. You do not have to force love. Love expresses itself when you recognize your unity with all life. This is why Jesus said, "Let your light shine." Not create your light, not polish it, not defend it, simply let it shine. The light is already within. The life is already within. The wisdom is already within. The kingdom is already within. Your task is not to make these things happen. Your task is to remove the false identity that has hidden them. And so spiritual living becomes effortless, not passive, but surrendered, not inactive, but receptive, not self-centered, but God-centered. When you truly recognize your oneness with the divine, you discover that life is not something you must manage. Life is something you must allow. And now, as we bring this period of inner contemplation to a close, let us return to the very first truth with which we began, because all spiritual realization, no matter how deep, always circles back to the same simplicity. God is not merely with you, God is being you. Everything we have explored today, oneness, silent union, inner guidance, effortless living, flows from this one foundational realization. You have not been walking toward God. You have not been growing closer to God. You have not been trying to reach a presence outside yourself. You have been awakening to the presence that has never been absent. Let your heart rest in this. There is no separation to overcome. There is no distance to bridge. There is no journey to complete. The divine life is the very essence of your being. The kingdom is not reached by effort, it is revealed by recognition. And recognition is not a dramatic revelation. It is not an emotional experience. It is not a spiritual fireworks display. It is a quiet, gentle knowing that arises in the stillness of your own consciousness. I and the Father are one. Not two, not near, one. Whenever fear arises, you return to recognition. Whenever anxiety stirs, you return to recognition. Whenever the mind insists on separation, you return to recognition, not through force, not through effort, not through repeated words, but through the quiet awareness that the life you are living is divine in origin, divine in nature, and divine in expression. Let this be your practice going forward. Before each activity, pause for just a moment, not to ask God to come, not to seek help from a distant heaven, but to acknowledge God is the presence of this moment. When facing a challenge, pause and recognize, my life is not separate from the infinite. When feeling uncertain, pause and know, the mind by which I think is God in expression. When feeling unworthy, pause and remember, nothing I have done, nothing I have feared, nothing I have believed has ever changed my spiritual identity. And when you forget, as all of us do, simply return again. There is no condemnation in forgetting. There is no failure in drifting. There is no judgment for falling back into human patterns. The spiritual life is not a path of perfection, it is a path of awakening. Each time you remember, the veil thins. Each time you recognize, the light grows stronger. Each time you rest in the presence, the illusion of separation weakens, and eventually, gradually, naturally, the truth becomes your home, your atmosphere, your way of living. You no longer try to remember God. You no longer struggle to find God. You simply know, and from that knowing, everything in your life begins to unfold with the effortless grace of the divine presence expressing itself through you. So let us end where all true spirituality begins, with quiet recognition. Wherever you are, in this very moment, simply rest in this truth. The kingdom of God is within me now. The presence of God is the life I am. I am, and always have been, one with the infinite. My friends, may this recognition accompany you gently into the next breath, the next step, the next conversation, and the next unfolding of your life. Not as a technique, not as a belief, but as the living truth of your being.
Beloved, the presence of God is not something to be summoned or persuaded. It is here, always here, flowing as the very essence of your being. Yet how often we build walls within ourselves and then cry out that we are separate from the source. The infinite river of divine energy never stops its movement. It is only our resistance, our self-made dams, that keep it from entering consciousness. To stop blocking God's flow, the first step is silence. Be still, not as one seeking reward, but as one resting in trust. When thought ceases its restless motion, the eternal whisper of spirit becomes audible. The noise of desire and fear must subside, for God's current is delicate. It cannot be heard above the roar of human will. Second, release judgment. Every criticism, every resentment, every lingering sense of unworthiness creates density in the soul. As light cannot enter a closed room, divine love cannot inhabit a heart filled with judgment. Forgive, not for another's sake, but that you may dissolve the shadow that hides the presence from your sight. Third, surrender control. Stop trying to shape life according to your plans and definitions. The divine intelligence knows what you need before you could name it. When you cease directing the flow, you discover it has been guiding you all along. Fourth, cultivate gratitude, not as a mental exercise, but as a recognition of truth. Gratitude affirms that the source is already pouring forth. It shifts awareness from what seems lacking to what eternally is. And in that acknowledgement, abundance expands naturally. Fifth, live in awareness. The presence is not an experience you have and lose. It is the fabric of existence itself. Train your perception to rest in the now. Each moment becomes a sacred revelation when you stop reaching into the future or clinging to the past. Do not strive to find God. Strive to remove that which hides God from your sight. The kingdom is not distant. It is the consciousness of divine flow realized. When you no longer block it with fear, control, or resistance, you will see that the river was never outside you. It was always your own life unfolding in perfect, infinite grace. Here are 5 keynotes capturing the essence of the speech. How to stop blocking God's flow. 5 steps to let divine energy in. The presence is already here. God's flow never stops. Only human resistance and self-created barriers prevent us from experiencing it. Silence opens the channel. Inner stillness and the quieting of thought allow the whisper of divine energy to be heard and felt. Let go of judgment and control, releasing criticism, resentment, and the need to manage life clears the path for divine intelligence to act freely. Gratitude aligns with the flow. True gratitude acknowledges the abundance already present, shifting awareness from lack to divine sufficiency. Live in present awareness. The flow of God is realized in the now. By resting in the present moment, life becomes a continuous revelation of grace. The presence is already here. It does not come and go like sunlight behind clouds. It is the eternal radiance that never ceases to shine. What changes is not God's activity, but our awareness of it. Imagine standing before a great river that flows endlessly, crystal and alive, and yet you keep your cup turned upside down, wondering why it remains empty. The river is not withholding itself, it is your positioning that prevents the filling. So it is with divine flow. The energy, intelligence, and love of God are ceaselessly moving through all creation, but when the mind is fixed on fear, separation, or striving, it cannot receive what is already present. To recognize that God's flow is ever present is to shift from a life of seeking to a life of awakening. The human mind often believes that it must earn grace, summon power through effort, or attract divine favor through ritual and repetition. Yet these are the very acts that keep us from realizing the truth there is nothing to attract, because the source has never been apart from its expression. Just as the ocean does not need to chase its waves, you do not need to chase the presence. You need only to awaken to it, to know that every breath you take, every heartbeat that moves in you, is the rhythm of divine life expressing itself. The blockage of God's flow happens when we place our faith in appearances. We believe in lack, we identify with limitation, and we bow before the noise of circumstance. Every time we declare, "I am not enough, life is unfair," or "things are against me," we reinforce a false God made of thought and emotion. The real presence is untouched by any of this. It does not diminish when you are sad, nor does it increase when you are joyful. It simply is. But the awareness of it expands in proportion to your stillness and your surrender. When you cease to demand that life conform to your image of good, when you no longer insist that God show up in the way you expect, then suddenly the veil thins. You realize that every moment was filled with divine activity, but your mind was too busy trying to manage the current to notice. The work, then, is not to reach for God, but to remove the inner noise that makes you deaf to the whisper already within. As you begin to rest in this understanding, peace arises. You stop trying to fix the world and start perceiving it as the living body of spirit. You no longer seek miracles. You see that life itself is the miracle. The presence becomes not a distant deity, but the pulse of being that sustains every atom, every leaf, every soul. To live in that awareness is to flow effortlessly with divine energy, to be carried rather than to carry yourself. In truth, there is no separation to overcome. There is only a veil of thought to dissolve. When that veil lifts, when even for an instant you glimpse the eternal presence that is both within and around you, you know the truth of freedom, that God's flow was never absent. It is the life you are, living, the breath you are breathing, and the consciousness through which you behold it all. Silence opens the channel through which divine energy flows freely into awareness. The human mind is often crowded with thoughts that compete for attention, worries, plans, regrets, and judgments, and in this constant noise, the soft voice of spirit is drowned out. It is not that God is absent, but that the mind is too occupied with its own echoes to perceive the still presence beneath them. Silence is not merely the absence of sound, it is the presence of receptivity, the inner quiet that allows the divine rhythm to be heard. When one learns to enter this silence, not through strain or effort, but through surrender, the flow of divine energy becomes as natural as breathing. The sacred quiet is not found by isolating oneself from the world, but by withdrawing attention from its turbulence. The stillness of spirit exists even in the midst of movement, and the one who learns to rest inwardly amid outer noise discovers that peace is not dependent on circumstance. It is an inner state, a sanctuary always available, waiting only to be entered. To enter it, one must cease striving, cease asking, pleading, and demanding that God speak, and instead listen with the heart. True listening is not an act of will but of surrender, an openness that expects nothing yet receives all. When silence is practiced sincerely, the mind begins to slow its spinning. Thoughts arise, but they no longer carry authority. Feelings pass, but they no longer disturb the surface of consciousness. In this quiet awareness, the divine presence makes itself known, not as words, not as visions, but as an unmistakable peace that fills every corner of being. It is as if an invisible current begins to move through you, uniting your breath, your heartbeat, and your perception with something vast and timeless. In silence, the illusion of separation starts to dissolve. You no longer perceive yourself as a body trying to reach a distant God. Instead, you sense that you are part of the same infinite stillness that sustains the stars. The walls of individuality grow transparent, and through them the light of divine awareness shines effortlessly. This is the state in which inspiration, guidance, and healing arise, not because you summoned them, but because you finally stopped resisting their natural arrival. Silence reveals the futility of noise-driven spirituality. Many believe they must speak words of affirmation or perform rituals to bring divine help closer, yet these are often acts of fear disguised as devotion. The presence cannot be invoked by sound, it is realized in quiet recognition. When you stop trying to make something happen, you create the space in which the eternal movement of God can express itself through you. The less you do, the more you are acted upon by the unseen intelligence that governs all creation. Even a few moments of deep silence each day begin to change the texture of life. The mind grows softer, reactions become slower, and the heart becomes more transparent. What once provoked anxiety now passes like wind through open space. The inner calm starts to radiate outward, touching the environment and those around you. Without speaking a word, you become a conduit for peace, and through you, the divine energy flows unimpeded. This silence is not an escape from life, but a return to the essence of life itself. It is the state in which divine energy meets human awareness and merges as one. When you live from this quiet center, words, actions, and thoughts arise spontaneously from a place of perfect alignment. You no longer seek to control outcomes because the presence within guides every step. And though the world may remain noisy, your spirit abides in unshakable stillness, through which the eternal current of God continues its effortless, unbroken flow. Letting go of judgment and control is the quiet act of returning to harmony with the divine order that already governs life perfectly. The human mind clings to its opinions, its fears, and its preferences, believing that by controlling outcomes, it can preserve safety or happiness. Yet every attempt to control life is an act of mistrust, a declaration that the divine wisdom which sustains galaxies cannot be trusted to guide the details of our small existence. Control is resistance disguised as order. It is the mind saying, I know better than the infinite, and in that moment, the natural flow of divine energy is obstructed. When one releases judgment, a great weight lifts. Judgment divides what God has made whole. It separates friend from enemy, success from failure, holy from unholy. Each time we judge, we step out of unity and into illusion. The divine flow cannot move freely through a divided consciousness because it is one with all that is. To let go of judgment is to return to the awareness that everything appearing in life is part of the same sacred unfolding. What seems wrong or imperfect may be a necessary motion in the larger rhythm of divine purpose, unseen by the limited mind. When you stop labeling experiences as good or bad, you begin to see them as expressions of one vast harmony, working toward awakening. Control, too, is a subtle form of fear. It arises from the belief that if you do not hold tightly to life, it will fall apart. But life does not depend on your grip, it depends on the invisible intelligence that created it. When you release the need to manage, fix, or force, you discover that things begin to fall into place with effortless precision. The same energy that spins the planets and orchestrates the tides is capable of arranging your affairs. In surrender, you move from anxiety to trust, from striving to alignment. This surrender is not weakness, it is the deepest strength, the strength that comes from realizing that divine order is unshakable. When you stop interfering, you feel the peace that comes from knowing that you are supported by something vast and benevolent. The ego seeks control because it feels separate. The soul releases control because it remembers unity. As you live from this remembrance, you no longer react to appearances, you respond from wisdom. Decisions arise spontaneously from intuition rather than from fear. Actions flow naturally without strain or calculation. Judgment and control feed each other. We judge what we do not understand, and because of that judgment, we try to control it. The more we control, the more fear we generate, and the cycle continues. The way out is gentle awareness. When you notice judgment rising, simply see it without condemnation. Recognize it as an old habit of separation and let it dissolve in the light of understanding. When you feel the urge to control, pause and breathe. Ask yourself whether love or fear is guiding your action. In that pause, divine wisdom enters, and often what once seemed urgent loses all power. As judgment fades, compassion blooms. You begin to see others not as obstacles or threats, but as mirrors of your own unfolding. Compassion softens the heart, and in that softness, divine energy moves easily, bringing healing where rigidity once ruled. When control dissolves, space opens for grace to act. The timing of life becomes perfect. Doors open without effort, and the peace you once sought through control reveals itself as your natural state. The flow of divine energy has never been blocked by life itself. It is blocked only by the insistence of the human will. When judgment and control are released, life reveals itself as a seamless expression of divine intelligence, moving through every circumstance, guiding, healing, and transforming in silence. Gratitude is not a polite response to good fortune, it is the recognition of divine reality. It is the awareness that what we call blessings are not occasional gifts handed down from afar, but the continuous expression of God's presence in and as life itself. Gratitude is not saying thank you or what we have. It is realizing that we are inseparable from the infinite source that never ceases to give. It transforms the heart from a vessel of longing into a channel of receiving. When one lives in gratitude, lack disappears, not because circumstances change, but because perception shifts from separation to fullness. The human mind tends to measure abundance by external possessions or visible success, yet divine abundance is not limited to these forms. It is the spiritual energy that manifests as life, breath, beauty, and love. When gratitude becomes the foundation of awareness, every moment glows with divine sufficiency. You no longer look outward for signs of grace, you see that grace is the ground you walk upon. The flow of divine energy cannot enter a consciousness filled with complaint or discontent, for those attitudes deny its existence. Gratitude, on the other hand, affirms what already is. It turns the heart toward recognition, and recognition opens the door to realization. In truth, gratitude is a form of prayer without words. It does not ask, it acknowledges. It does not seek to bring more into life, for it knows that the fullness of life is already here. When you awaken in the morning and sense the quiet rhythm of your own breath, gratitude arises naturally. It is not for something external, it is for being, for awareness itself. This kind of gratitude is a silent communion with the divine, a moment in which the soul whispers, "I see you everywhere." In that seeing, the illusion of lack dissolves, and the flow of divine energy is felt as peace, joy, and effortless supply. Many believe they must wait for things to improve before they can feel grateful, but this is the inversion of spiritual law. Gratitude is not the result of harmony, it is the cause. When you give thanks in the midst of uncertainty, you align your consciousness with divine order. That alignment shifts the energy around you. The external world, being the mirror of inner awareness, begins to reorganize itself in response to the vibration of appreciation. What once seemed delayed or denied begins to unfold with ease, because the resistance has been removed. Gratitude loosens the tight grip of fear and control, allowing divine intelligence to move unobstructed through your experience. Gratitude also softens the heart. It removes the armor of self-pity and opens the eyes to the beauty of the ordinary. The simple sound of wind through trees, the warmth of a friend's voice, the stillness of evening, all become revelations of the divine presence. When you begin to live this way, you realize that the sacred has never been absent, it was only unnoticed. Gratitude restores the ability to see holiness in everything, to sense the pulse of spirit even in what the world calls mundane. This vision lifts you beyond duality, beyond the division between sacred and secular, gain and loss, good and bad. All becomes one movement of divine life, unfolding perfectly. To live in gratitude is to live in faith. It is to trust that every circumstance, even those wrapped in difficulty, carries within it a seed of grace. You no longer ask, "Why is this happening to me?" But what truth is this revealing? Gratitude turns adversity into instruction, pain into awakening. It transforms the narrow tunnel of personal desire into the wide horizon of divine vision. When you no longer wait for things to be right before feeling thankful, you discover that they are already right in ways the mind cannot yet comprehend. In this state, gratitude ceases to be a practice and becomes a natural condition of being. It is the song of the soul in tune with its source. Through it, divine energy flows effortlessly, nourishing every aspect of existence, until there is no longer one who gives thanks and one who is thanked. Only the eternal harmony of love, recognizing itself everywhere. Living in present awareness is the quiet art of seeing life as it truly is, unfiltered by memory or expectation. The human mind is forever wandering, rehashing what was or anticipating what might be, and in this ceaseless motion, it misses the only moment where God's flow can be felt now. Divine energy is not found in the past or the future. It exists only in the eternal present, where all creation unfolds. When you live in awareness, each breath becomes a doorway to the infinite, and the ordinary reveals its sacred nature. The past dissolves, the future loses its pull, and consciousness rests in the wholeness of being. Awareness is not concentration, it is receptivity. Concentration narrows attention to a single object, but awareness opens to the totality of what is. It does not exclude sound, sensation, or thought. It simply witnesses them without attachment. In that witnessing, the turbulence of the mind begins to calm, and beneath the surface you sense a still presence, vast and unmoving. This presence is not something you create. It is what remains when all effort ceases. It is divine consciousness itself, silently perceiving through you. When you learn to rest in this state, you realize that awareness is not a practice you perform, it is what you are. The flow of divine energy enters through this awareness because it is free of obstruction. The moment you step outside the present, thinking about what should have been or what might be, you tighten the channel. The mind, in its constant commentary, becomes a veil between you and reality. But when awareness deepens, the veil thins, and everything around you begins to shimmer with life. A simple movement, a sound, or a glance reveals divine intelligence at work. You start to feel that nothing happens by accident, that every experience carries purpose, and that the same presence breathing within you animates all things. Living in awareness is not an escape from responsibility, it is the highest form of participation. When you act from the present, action arises not from compulsion, but from clarity. Decisions made in awareness are infused with wisdom because they come from the source rather than from fear or habit. Life becomes spontaneous and fluid without strain. You are no longer the doer struggling to manage existence, you are the witness through whom divine energy expresses effortlessly. This awareness also transforms your relationship with time. You stop racing to arrive somewhere else, because you realize that every moment is a complete unfolding of eternity. The search for fulfillment ends because fulfillment is recognized as the very fabric of the now. Even in stillness, something profound is moving. Life itself, revealing its perfection moment by moment. The tension that once accompanied delay or uncertainty dissolves, replaced by quiet trust that what needs to unfold will do so at the perfect time. Living in the present also dissolves the illusion of separation. The observer and the observed are seen as one movement of consciousness. You no longer see yourself as an isolated being surrounded by an external world, but as awareness witnessing itself in infinite forms. This recognition brings humility and compassion. You feel connected to all living things because you perceive that the same divine energy animates every heart, every breath, every blade of grass. In that perception, love becomes effortless, no longer an emotion to cultivate, but a state of being that flows naturally when resistance disappears. As awareness deepens, life's rhythm becomes harmonious. You begin to trust the pauses as much as the movements, the silences as much as the sounds. Each instant becomes a prayer without words, an offering of presence to presence. Living this way, you realize that there is no journey to enlightenment, no distance between you and God's flow. There is only awareness, awake and still, through which divine energy reveals itself as the quiet joy of being alive. When the walls of resistance fall, when silence replaces striving, and when gratitude becomes the natural song of your heart, you awaken to the truth that God's flow was never absent. It is not a force that comes and goes, it is the life within life, the invisible rhythm behind every breath, every heartbeat, every moment of awareness. The divine energy you seek has been seeking you only through your own stillness, your surrender, and your openness. As you release judgment, control, and fear, the current of spirit carries you effortlessly, guiding each step without effort or anxiety. You begin to live, not by personal will, but by divine movement. In this sacred alignment, peace ceases to be a goal and becomes your natural atmosphere. You find yourself no longer striving to connect with God, for you realize that you were never apart, and in that realization, life becomes prayer. Every breath a communion, Every experience a revelation. The river of divine energy flows through you, as you, without interruption or end, quiet, radiant, and eternal.